Good evening. My name is Cole, and tonight I'll be sharing a series of real-life creepy encounters. The kind that don't need ghosts or monsters to get under your skin. These are stories about strange people, quiet threats, and those moments when your instincts scream that something isn't right. So find a safe spot, dim the lights, and get comfortable as we walk through these unsettling encounters together. Let's start with our first story. This one comes from someone who discovered that sometimes the most terrifying encounters happen in broad daylight, surrounded by other people. The poster learned that being in public doesn't always mean being safe, and that predators can be incredibly patient when they've set their sights on you. The man in the hoodie followed me across 3 bus transfers and never looked at anything except me. I still get chills thinking about that afternoon, and it's been months since it happened. I was heading home from work, taking my usual route that involves switching buses twice to get to my neighborhood. It's normally pretty routine. Nothing exciting ever happens during the commute. I first noticed him when I was waiting at the downtown station for the first bus. He was standing about 20 feet away, wearing a dark grey hoodie with the hood pulled up. What caught my attention wasn't his appearance. It was the way he was staring. Not glancing, not looking around like everyone else waiting for their rides. Just staring directly at me with this intense, unblinking focus that made my skin crawl. When the bus arrived, I got on and found a seat near the middle. Through the window, I watched him board behind me. The bus was pretty crowded, so I figured maybe I was being paranoid. People look at each other on public transit all the time. But when I glanced back, he was sitting 3 rows behind me, and his eyes were still fixed on the back of my head. Not on his phone, not looking out the window, not reading anything, just watching me. The first transfer came up about 15 minutes later. I gathered my things and got off, and sure enough, he got off right behind me. At this point, my heart started racing a little. Coincidences happen, but this was starting to feel deliberate. I walked to the next bus stop, and he followed at the exact same distance. When I sat down on the bench, he stood nearby, never breaking that creepy stare. The second bus arrived, and the same thing happened. I got on, he got on. I found a seat. He sat a few rows back. The whole ride, I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my skull. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. Normal people don't behave this way. When it came time for my second and final transfer, I decided to test my theory. Instead of getting off at my usual stop, I stayed on the bus for 2 extra stops, just to see what would happen. He stayed on too. When I finally got off at a stop I'd never used before, he got off behind me. That's when I knew for certain that I was being followed. I was now in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, and it was starting to get dark. The bus stop was basically deserted except for me and him. I pretended to check my phone while trying to figure out what to do next. Should I call someone? Should I go into a nearby store? Should I confront him directly? That's when I made eye contact with him for the first time. He was standing maybe 10 feet away, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away or act embarrassed, like someone who'd been caught staring accidentally. Instead, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, not an apologetic smile. A cold, predatory smile that made every alarm bell in my head start ringing at full volume. I decided to walk toward a nearby convenience store that looked busy. He followed me, maintaining that same distance, that same unwavering focus. When I went inside, he stood outside the window, still watching. The store clerk noticed and asked if I was okay. I explained the situation, and he offered to call the police, but I was worried about overreacting to what might just be a weird coincidence. Instead, I asked if I could wait inside for a while. The clerk was really understanding and let me hang out near the counter for about 20 minutes. Through the window, I could see the man in the hoodie pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, occasionally stopping to peer through the glass. He never went anywhere else, never got distracted by anything. He just waited. Eventually, I called a friend to come pick me up. When she arrived, the man finally walked away, but not before giving me one last long look through the window. As my friend drove me home, I kept checking the mirrors to make sure we weren't being followed. We weren't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The whole experience left me completely shaken. What scared me the most wasn't just being followed, it was the methodical, patient way he did it. He rode 3 different buses, waited through multiple stops, and never once looked at anything except me. No phone, no book, no other passengers, just me. That level of focused attention from a complete stranger is absolutely terrifying. That was 3 months ago, and I still take different routes home from work. I've never seen him again. but I find myself constantly checking over my shoulder, especially at bus stops. The whole thing made me realize how vulnerable we are in public spaces and how someone can follow you for hours without anyone else noticing or caring. This story gives me absolute chills because of how calculated and persistent this person was. The fact that he followed the poster across multiple bus transfers, never breaking his stare, never getting distracted by anything else, shows a level of predatory focus that's genuinely terrifying. What makes it even worse is how he smiled when they made eye contact, like he was enjoying the fear he was causing. The patience required to follow someone through that many stops suggests this wasn't impulsive behavior, but something much more deliberate and planned. Our next story takes us from the busy world of public transit to a much more isolated and vulnerable situation. Sometimes the most frightening encounters happen when you're completely alone and there's nowhere to run. I heard someone whisper, "Found you," when I walked past an alley I never use. This happened about 2 weeks ago, and I still can't walk down that street without my heart racing. I was coming home late from my friend's place, probably around 11 at night. It's not a route I normally take, but there was construction blocking my usual path, so I had to detour through this residential area I wasn't really familiar with. The street was completely empty, which isn't unusual for that time of night in my neighborhood. Most people are inside by then, and there's not much foot traffic after dark. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast, just trying to get home as quickly as possible. The streetlights were spaced pretty far apart, creating these pockets of deep shadow between each pool of light. I was walking at a pretty good pace, not running, but definitely moving with purpose. That's when I passed this narrow alley between 2 apartment buildings. I barely glanced down it because it was pitch black, just a narrow gap that disappeared into complete darkness. I've lived in this area for years, and I know these little alleys exist, but I never have any reason to go down them. That's when I heard it. A whisper, maybe a foot away from my ear, crystal clear despite my headphones. "Found you." Not shouted, not spoken in a normal voice. Whispered, like someone was standing right next to me, close enough that I should have been able to feel their breath on my neck. I stopped dead in my tracks and ripped my headphones out. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked around frantically, but I was still completely alone on the sidewalk. The alley to my right was still just a black void, and I couldn't see anyone or anything in either direction on the street. Here's what made it truly terrifying. When I stopped walking, I heard something else stop too. Not footsteps, because I hadn't heard any footsteps. I heard breathing stop, like whoever had whispered to me was holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do next. The silence was so complete and so sudden that it felt intentional. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, straining to hear anything, any sound that would explain what had just happened. Nothing. No movement, no breathing, no shuffling. Just this oppressive silence that felt heavy and wrong. I kept staring into that alley, trying to make out any shapes or movement in the darkness. But it was like looking into a black hole. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was someone's television or radio. Maybe it was a homeless person talking to themselves. Maybe I imagined it entirely. But deep down, I knew what I heard, and I knew it was directed at me. The timing was too perfect, the proximity too close, the word choice too specific. I started walking again, much faster this time, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made me jump. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, or to see someone following me, but the street remained empty. That almost made it worse, because it meant whoever whispered to me was still back there, still hidden in that alley. When I finally got to my apartment building, I practically ran up the stairs to my unit. I locked the door behind me and immediately went to the window that faces the street. I could see the alley from my apartment, just barely, but it was still too dark to make out any details. I watched for probably an hour, but nothing moved, no one emerged. The next morning, I walked past that alley in broad daylight, curious despite my fear. It's just a narrow passage between buildings, maybe 4 feet wide, with a chain link fence at the back. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere someone could have been standing without me seeing them. But there's also no way the sound could have come from anywhere else. I've been taking a different route home ever since. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I can't bring myself to walk past that alley again, especially at night. The whole experience left me feeling like I was being hunted, like someone had been waiting specifically for me to walk down that street. This story absolutely terrifies me because of how impossible it seems, yet how real it clearly was for the poster. The fact that they heard breathing stop when they stopped walking suggests someone was deliberately trying to remain hidden and undetected. The word choice of found you implies this wasn't random, that someone had been looking for them specifically. What's most disturbing is how the person managed to whisper so close to their ear without being visible, and then vanish completely without making any sound. The next encounter shows us how quickly a normal situation can turn sinister when someone decides to test your boundaries in the most brazen way possible. A guy tried to open my car door at a red light and smiled like it was a joke. I'm still processing what happened because it was so sudden and so bold that I almost convinced myself it didn't actually happen. I was driving home from grocery shopping last Saturday afternoon, stopped at a busy intersection downtown. There were cars all around me, people walking on the sidewalks, completely normal weekend traffic. I was checking my phone while waiting for the light to change when I heard this metallic clicking sound. At first, I thought maybe something was wrong with my car, like the engine was making a weird noise. Then I realized the sound was coming from my driver's side door. Someone was pulling on the handle, trying to open it. I looked over, and there was this guy standing right next to my car, maybe in his 30s, wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt. Nothing about his appearance was particularly memorable or threatening. He looked like any random person you'd see at the grocery store, but he was tugging on my door handle with this casual determination, like he had every right to be there. The first pull didn't work because my doors were locked. So he tried again, harder this time, making that clicking sound as the handle moved, but the door stayed shut. Then he tried a third time, really yanking on it. The whole time, he was staring directly at me through the window with this neutral expression, like we were having a perfectly normal interaction. I was so shocked that I just sat there for a few seconds, not sure if this was really happening. My brain couldn't process why a complete stranger would try to get into my car in broad daylight at a busy intersection. Was he confused? Did he think I was someone else? Was this some kind of emergency? Then he stopped pulling on the handle and just stood there, still staring at me. That's when he smiled. Not a friendly smile, not an embarrassed, oops, wrong car smile. This slow, deliberate smile that made my blood run cold. Like he was enjoying my confusion and fear. Like this was exactly the reaction he wanted. I rolled down my window just enough to ask what he wanted, thinking maybe there was some reasonable explanation. But before I could say anything, he leaned down closer to the glass and said in this perfectly calm voice, just checking if it was locked. Then he laughed, like we were sharing some private joke. The light turned green and cars behind me started honking. I was about to drive away when he stepped back from my car and mouthed something at me through the windshield. I'm not great at reading lips, but it looked like, next time. Then he gave me that same creepy smile and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians on the sidewalk. I sat through the entire next red light cycle because my hands were shaking too badly to drive. Other drivers were honking and going around me, but I needed a minute to process what had just happened. A complete stranger had tried to get into my car, smiled when it didn't work, and then essentially threatened me before walking away like nothing happened. What scared me most was how casual and confident he was about the whole thing. He wasn't nervous or looking around to see if anyone was watching. He wasn't acting like someone who was confused or having a mental health crisis. He was calm and deliberate and seemed to be enjoying himself. That level of boldness in broad daylight suggests this wasn't his first time doing something like this. I ended up driving straight to the police station to file a report, though I wasn't sure what they could do about it. The officer who took my statement said they'd increase patrols in that area, but without a license plate number or better description, there wasn't much they could investigate. He did tell me that this kind of behavior often escalates, and that I should be extra careful about my surroundings for the next few weeks. It's been a month now, and I still think about it every time I'm stopped at a red light. I keep my doors locked and my windows up, and I find myself constantly checking my mirrors to see if anyone is approaching my car. The whole experience made me realize how vulnerable we are when we're just sitting in traffic, assuming we're safe because we're surrounded by other people. The sheer boldness of this encounter is what makes it so disturbing. This person tested the poster's door in broad daylight at a busy intersection, with witnesses everywhere, and when it didn't open, he smiled like it was all part of some game. The fact that he mouthed "next time" suggests this wasn't random opportunism, but something much more calculated and threatening. What's most chilling is how comfortable he seemed with the whole situation, like trying to get into strangers' cars was just a normal part of his day. Sometimes, the most unsettling encounters involve objects that shouldn't be where they are, appearing in ways that seem impossible. Our next story involves a discovery that left the poster questioning their own safety and sanity. Someone slipped a piece of paper into my pocket on the train, and it had my home address on it. I've ridden public transit for years, and I thought I was pretty aware of my surroundings, but this completely blindsided me. It happened during my evening commute last Tuesday, on a train that was packed with the usual rush hour crowd. I was standing near the middle of the car, holding onto one of the poles, listening to music through my earbuds. The train was crowded enough that people were pressed pretty close together, but not uncomfortably so. Just typical rush hour conditions, where everyone's trying to maintain their personal space while dealing with the reality of being packed into a small space with dozens of strangers. I had my hands full with my phone and my work bag, and I was wearing a jacket with side pockets. The pockets aren't deep, maybe 4 inches, and they were empty when I got on the train. I'm sure of this because I specifically remember checking them for my Metro card before I boarded. The ride was about 20 minutes, and nothing seemed unusual. People got on and off at various stops. The crowd shifted around a bit, but I didn't notice anyone paying particular attention to me or standing unusually close. I wasn't on my phone scrolling through social media or anything that would have distracted me from what was happening around me. When I got to my stop, I gathered my things and started moving toward the doors with everyone else. That's when I felt something in my pocket that hadn't been there before. At first, I thought maybe it was a receipt or piece of trash that had somehow gotten mixed up with my stuff, so I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until I was walking up the stairs from the platform that I actually pulled it out to look at it. It was a small piece of white paper, folded once, with something written on it in blue ink. The handwriting was neat and careful, like someone had taken their time to make sure it was legible. When I unfolded it, my heart just stopped. Written in block letters was my full home address. Not just the street name, but my exact apartment number. The address where I was currently walking home to. The place where I sleep every night. Written in handwriting I'd never seen before. I stopped right there on the sidewalk and stared at the paper, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could someone have my address? How did they get close enough to slip this into my pocket without me noticing? Who on that crowded train knew where I lived? The paper smelled like cologne, a scent I didn't recognize, but was definitely masculine. It wasn't a cheap drugstore cologne either. It was something expensive and distinctive. The smell was strong enough that whoever wrote this note must have been wearing quite a bit of it, or had the paper in their pocket for a while, next to a bottle of the stuff. I looked back toward the train station, but of course everyone who had been on my car was long gone, scattered in different directions to their own destinations. There was no way to figure out who had done this, or when exactly it had happened during the 20-minute ride. The more I thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. The train had been crowded, but I hadn't felt anyone brush against me, or bump into me in a way that would have given them access to my pocket. I definitely would have noticed someone reaching into my jacket. And even if someone had managed to slip the paper in without me feeling it, how did they know my address in the first place? I spent the entire walk home looking over my shoulder, checking to see if anyone was following me. When I got to my building, I stood outside for a few minutes, scanning the street to see if anyone was watching or waiting nearby. Everything looked normal, but the whole situation had me completely paranoid. That night, I couldn't sleep, thinking about all the implications. Someone had not only gotten close enough to pickpocket me in reverse, but they knew where I lived. They'd taken the time to write out my address and carry it with them, waiting for the right moment to slip it into my pocket. This wasn't random. This was planned. I filed a police report the next day. There wasn't much they could do. No crime had technically been committed, and there was no way to trace the paper or identify who had written it. The officer suggested I might want to consider changing my routine for a while, maybe taking different trains at different times. It's been 2 weeks now, and I haven't seen anything suspicious or found any more notes. But I can't shake the feeling that someone out there knows more about my life than they should, and that they wanted me to know they know. The whole thing feels like a warning or a threat, even though no actual harm was done. This story gives me chills because of how personal and invasive it is. Someone took the time to learn where the poster lives, wrote it down, and then managed to slip it into their pocket on a crowded train without being detected. The cologne scent suggests this person was close enough for long enough that their fragrance transferred to the paper, which means they were planning this encounter carefully. What makes it even more disturbing is that this feels like a demonstration of power, someone showing they can get close enough to touch the poster without being noticed, and that they know intimate details about their life. Our next story takes place in what should be a safe environment, but shows how predators can hide behind positions of authority and familiarity. My teacher pulled me aside after class and asked if I still remembered the secret, even though I never had one with him. This happened during my senior year of high school, in a class I'd been taking for about 3 months. Mr. Henderson taught advanced placement history, and up until this incident, I'd always found him to be a pretty normal, professional teacher. The class had just ended, and everyone was packing up their stuff and heading to their next period. I was one of the last students to leave because I'd been taking notes until the very last minute, trying to catch up on some reading I'd fallen behind on. As I was putting my books in my backpack, Mr. Henderson called my name from behind his desk. He asked me to come over, which wasn't unusual since teachers sometimes need to discuss grades or assignments with individual students. But as I walked toward his desk, he got up and moved toward the door. I figured he was just going to close it so we could talk privately about whatever academic issue he wanted to discuss. Instead of just closing the door, he positioned himself in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms stretched across the opening, not completely blocking it, but definitely creating a barrier between me and the exit. His body language shifted too, from professional teacher mode to something more casual and familiar. That's when he asked the question that made my skin crawl. "So, do you still remember our little secret?" He said it with this knowing smile, like we were old friends sharing some private joke, like we had some kind of special relationship that the other students weren't part of. I was completely confused because I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd never had any kind of secret with Mr. Henderson, or any private conversations beyond normal student-teacher interactions about homework and tests. I told him I didn't know what he meant, hoping he'd clarify or realize he had me confused with someone else. But instead of explaining or apologizing for the confusion, his entire demeanor changed. The friendly, conspiratorial smile disappeared instantly, replaced by this look of annoyance and disappointment, like I was being deliberately difficult or uncooperative, like I was ruining some game he thought we were playing. He kept standing in the doorway, not moving aside to let me leave, and repeated the question in a more insistent tone. "Come on, you know what I'm talking about. Our secret from earlier this year." But there was no secret from earlier in the year, or any other time. I'd never had any interaction with this teacher outside of normal classroom activities. I told him again that I really didn't know what he was referring to, and asked if I could please go to my next class because I was going to be late. That's when he finally stepped aside, but not before giving me this long, searching look, like he was trying to figure out if I was lying or just playing dumb. The whole interaction lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt much longer because of how uncomfortable and confused I was. As I walked to my next class, I kept trying to think of anything that could have been construed as a secret between us, but came up with nothing. We'd never talked about anything personal, never had any conversations outside of class, never interacted in any way that wasn't completely normal and appropriate. That afternoon when I got home, I found an email from Mr. Henderson in my inbox. It had been sent from a personal Gmail account, not his official school email address. The subject line just said, "Follow up," and the message was short but deeply unsettling. The email said something like, "I hope you'll give some more thought to our conversation today. I think you know what I'm referring to, even if you're not ready to acknowledge it yet. Sometimes it takes time to remember things we've tried to forget. Let me know when you're ready to talk." I had never given him my personal email address. The only email he should have had access to was my school account, which he would have used for official class communications. The fact that he was contacting me from a personal account about a non-existent secret using an email address I'd never provided made the whole situation exponentially more creepy. I showed the email to my parents that night, and they immediately contacted the school administration. Within a few days, Mr. Henderson was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. I had to give a statement to both the school officials and a police detective about the incident. During the investigation, it came out that several other students had received similar emails from the same personal account, and that Mr. Henderson had a history of inappropriate boundary crossing with students. Nothing criminal had been proven, but there was a pattern of behavior that made the administration uncomfortable enough to terminate his employment. I never found out what secret he thought we shared, or whether he was genuinely confused or deliberately trying to manipulate me into some kind of inappropriate relationship. The whole experience taught me that predators often test boundaries gradually, seeing how much they can get away with before escalating their behavior. The psychological manipulation in this story is what makes it so disturbing. This teacher tried to convince the poster that they shared some intimate secret, then acted disappointed and frustrated when they didn't play along with his fantasy. The fact that he had their personal email address and contacted them from his own personal account shows premeditation and a clear violation of professional boundaries. What's most unsettling is how he tried to gaslight the poster into questioning their own memory, suggesting they were just not ready to acknowledge something that never happened. Sometimes the most frightening encounters happen right at the threshold of our safe spaces, when someone tries to breach the barriers we depend on for security. A man tried to follow me into my apartment building by pretending we knew each other. This happened about 6 weeks ago, and I'm still shaken up by how brazen and calculated the whole thing was. I was coming home from work around 7 in the evening, walking up to the front entrance of my building, like I do every weekday. My apartment building has a security door that requires either a key card or for someone inside to buzz you in. It's not the most secure system in the world, but it's enough to keep random people from wandering into the hallways. I was fishing around in my purse for my key card when I heard someone call out from behind me. "Hey, I've been trying to call you." The voice was loud and friendly, like someone greeting an old friend they hadn't seen in a while. I turned around to see a man walking toward me with this big smile on his face, waving like we were best buddies. He was probably in his 40s, average height, wearing a business suit that looked expensive but rumpled. The problem was, I had absolutely no idea who this person was. I'd never seen him before in my life. Not in my building, not at work, not anywhere. But he was acting like we had some kind of established relationship, like it was perfectly normal for him to be approaching me at my front door. As he got closer, he kept up the charade. "I called you like 3 times today. Didn't you get my messages?" He was speaking loud enough that anyone nearby would hear and assume we knew each other. He even had his phone out, waving it around like he was showing me evidence of all these supposed calls. I told him he had me confused with someone else, but he just laughed and shook his head like I was being silly. "Come on, don't be like that. Let me come up for a few minutes so we can talk." The whole time, he was edging closer to the front door, clearly hoping I would open it and he could slip in behind me. That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. This man was deliberately pretending to know me so I would let him into my building. He was counting on social politeness and the assumption that I wouldn't want to make a scene in public by calling him a liar. I stepped away from the door and told him very clearly that I didn't know him and he needed to leave me alone. That's when his entire demeanor changed in an instant. The friendly smile vanished, replaced by this cold, hostile expression. The fake, cheerful tone disappeared, and his voice became flat and threatening. "Fine," he said, but he didn't move away from the door. Instead, he just stood there staring at me with this look of barely contained anger, like I had personally offended him by not playing along with his game. The transformation was so sudden and complete that it was genuinely frightening. I walked away from the building entrance and called the police from across the street. While I was on the phone, I watched him try the same routine with 2 other people who approached the building. A woman in her 20s came up to the door and he immediately started the same act. "Sarah, there you are. I've been waiting for you." She looked just as confused as I had been, but she was less assertive about shutting him down. She kept apologizing and saying she didn't think they knew each other, while he kept insisting they did. She ended up walking away without going into her own building because he made her so uncomfortable. Then an older man approached, and the predator tried yet again. "Bob, good to see you, man." But this guy wasn't having any of it. He told the creep to get lost in terms I can't repeat here, and threatened to call the cops if he didn't leave immediately. Only then did the man finally walk away, but not before giving everyone involved that same cold, angry stare. The police showed up about 10 minutes later and took statements from all of us. The officer said this was a common tactic used by people trying to gain access to apartment buildings for various criminal purposes. Sometimes they're looking for places to rob, sometimes they're trying to assault someone, sometimes they just want to scope out potential victims. What scared me most was how good he was at the act initially. If I had been distracted or in a hurry, I might have just assumed I was forgetting someone I'd met briefly somewhere. His whole approach was designed to exploit people's natural inclination to be polite and avoid confrontation, even when something feels wrong. The fact that he immediately tried the same routine with other people showed this wasn't improvised or desperate behavior. This was a practiced technique he'd probably used many times before. The speed with which his mask dropped when I didn't cooperate was terrifying, revealing the cold calculation behind his friendly facade. This story perfectly illustrates how predators exploit social norms and politeness to gain access to their victims. The way this man immediately pivoted to trying the same scam on other residents shows this was a practice routine, not a moment of desperation. What's most chilling is how quickly his friendly mask slipped when the poster didn't play along, revealing the genuine anger underneath. He was essentially running a social engineering attack, counting on people's reluctance to be rude to a stranger. Our next encounter demonstrates how some people will go to extraordinary lengths to monitor and track their targets, turning everyday activities into a web of surveillance. I noticed the same car parked outside my job, my gym, and my apartment all in one day. At first, I thought it was just a weird coincidence. But by the third location, I knew someone was deliberately following me around town. The car was a dark blue sedan, maybe 10 years old, with a distinctive dent in the front bumper that made it easy to identify. The first time I saw it was when I left work around 5:30 in the afternoon. I always park in the same section of the company parking lot, and this car was about 4 spaces away from mine. What caught my attention wasn't the car itself, but the fact that someone was sitting in the driver's seat, engine running, like they were waiting for something. I didn't think much of it at first. People wait in parking lots all the time, picking up friends or family members, making phone calls, or just taking a break. But as I walked toward my own car, I noticed the person behind the wheel watching me. Not just a casual glance, but sustained attention that made me uncomfortable. The driver was a woman, maybe in her 30s, with short, dark hair. She was wearing sunglasses, even though it was getting close to dusk and the lighting wasn't particularly bright. When I looked in her direction, she didn't look away or act embarrassed about staring. She just kept watching me get into my car and drive away. I went straight to the gym from work, which is about 15 minutes away on the other side of town. I parked in the gym's lot and went inside for my usual workout routine. About an hour and a half later, when I came back outside, there was that same blue sedan parked 3 rows away from my car. Same dent in the bumper, same license plate number that I'd made a mental note of at my workplace. This time, there was a different person behind the wheel. A man, probably middle-aged, also wearing sunglasses despite the fact that it was now completely dark outside. He was doing the same thing as the woman had been doing, just sitting there with the engine running, watching. When I walked toward my car, he started his engine and pulled out of the parking lot ahead of me. That's when I started to get really worried. One person following me could be explained as some kind of misunderstanding or coincidence, but 2 different people in the same car at 2 different locations on the same day. That suggested a level of coordination and planning that was genuinely frightening. I decided to test my theory by taking a detour on my way home. Instead of driving straight to my apartment, I stopped at a coffee shop about 10 minutes out of my way. I went inside, ordered a drink, and sat by the window where I could watch the parking lot. Sure enough, about 5 minutes after I'd gone inside, the blue sedan pulled into the lot and parked where the driver would have a clear view of my car. This time, it was a third person, someone I hadn't seen before. A younger man, probably in his 20s, sitting in the same position as the previous 2 drivers. He wasn't looking at the coffee shop or doing anything else that would suggest he had legitimate business there. He was just waiting and watching, same as the others. I stayed in the coffee shop for about 30 minutes, partly because I was scared to leave and partly because I wanted to see what would happen. The man in the sedan never got out of his car, never went anywhere else, never even moved from his parking spot. He just sat there the entire time, occasionally looking toward the window where I was sitting. When I finally worked up the courage to leave, I drove straight home, constantly checking my mirrors to see if I was being followed. The sedan stayed about 3 car lengths behind me the entire way, making the same turns, stopping at the same lights. When I pulled into my apartment complex, he drove past the entrance, but slowly, like he was making note of where I lived. I spent the rest of the evening looking out my window, and sure enough, the car was parked across the street about an hour later. Different driver again, this time an older woman, but same car, same suspicious behavior. She sat there for almost 2 hours before finally driving away sometime after midnight. The next morning, I filed a police report and gave them the license plate number and descriptions of all 4 people I'd seen driving the car. The officers said they would look into it, but unless someone actually approached me or threatened me directly, there wasn't much they could charge anyone with. I ended up changing my routine completely for the next few weeks. Different gym, different route to work, different places to shop and eat. I never saw the blue sedan again, but the whole experience left me feeling violated and unsafe. Someone had invested significant time and multiple people into tracking my movements, and I still have no idea why. The coordination required for this level of surveillance is absolutely terrifying. 4 different people, same car, tracking the poster across multiple locations throughout a single day. This wasn't random stalking or a crime of opportunity. This was organized surveillance that required planning, resources, and multiple participants. The fact that they had different drivers for different locations suggests they were trying to avoid being identified, which means they knew what they were doing was wrong and potentially illegal. What makes it even more disturbing is that the poster never found out why they were being watched so carefully. Sometimes the most frightening encounters happen when you're at your most vulnerable, and someone takes advantage of that vulnerability in the most predatory way possible. A group of men surrounded me at a gas station and asked if I wanted to make easy money. This happened about 3 months ago, late on a Sunday night when I was driving home from visiting my sister. I'd been on the road for about 4 hours and needed to stop for gas and to use the bathroom. The gas station was one of those big truck stop places right off the highway, the kind that stays open all night for long-distance drivers. It was probably around 11 p.m, and the place was mostly empty, except for a few 18-wheelers parked in the back lot. I pulled up to one of the pumps and started filling my tank. While the gas was pumping, I went inside to pay and use the restroom. The clerk behind the counter was this tired-looking older man who barely acknowledged me when I walked in. There were a few other customers browsing the snack aisles, but nothing seemed unusual or dangerous about the situation. When I came back outside to my car, that's when things got scary fast. 3 men had positioned themselves around my vehicle in a way that clearly wasn't accidental. One was standing right next to my driver's side door, leaning against it casually like he owned the place. Another was behind my car, near the trunk, blocking my ability to back out of the parking space. The third man was standing on the passenger side, and he was the one who started talking to me as soon as I walked up. "Hey there, sweetheart. You look like you could use some extra cash." His tone was friendly, but fake, the kind of overly familiar way that men sometimes talk to women when they're trying to manipulate them. I told them I needed to get going and asked them to move away from my car. But instead of stepping aside, the man by my door actually moved closer, essentially trapping me between him and the gas pump. "Don't be in such a hurry," he said, still with that fake smile. "We've got a business proposition for you." That's when he asked if I wanted to make some easy money. He didn't specify what kind of work he was talking about, but the implication was clear from the way he was looking at me and the fact that they had me surrounded. The other 2 men were just standing there, not saying anything, but their presence was obviously meant to intimidate me into compliance. I tried to walk around him to get to my car door, but he moved to block me again. "Come on, don't be like that. We're talking about good money here, more than you'd make in a week at whatever regular job you've got." The man behind my car had moved closer too, and I realized I was essentially trapped between the 3 of them. The one by the passenger side started tapping on my window with his knuckles, making this rhythmic sound that was clearly meant to get my attention and add to the pressure they were putting on me. Even after I shook my head and told them I wasn't interested, he kept tapping. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 like he was playing some kind of game. I said I needed to leave and asked them again to move away from my car, but they just laughed. The main spokesperson said something like, "You're not going anywhere until we finish our conversation. We drove a long way to meet you, and we're not taking no for an answer." That's when I realized this wasn't a random encounter. They hadn't just happened to be at this gas station when I pulled up. They had been waiting for me, or for someone like me, a woman traveling alone late at night, vulnerable and isolated. The way they had positioned themselves around my car was too coordinated to be spontaneous. I started looking around for help, but the gas station attendant was inside and couldn't see what was happening from behind the counter. The few truck drivers who were there were parked way in the back, too far away to notice what was going on, or hear me if I called for help. I was essentially on my own. The man blocking my door started getting more aggressive, moving even closer and lowering his voice to what I guess he thought was a seductive tone. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but you're going to get in our car and come with us either way. So why don't you make it simple for everyone?" That's when I knew I was in real danger. This wasn't just harassment or an attempt to scam me. These men were planning to kidnap me, and they were confident enough about their plan to be explicit about their intentions. I had to do something fast before the situation escalated further. I started screaming as loud as I could, hoping someone inside the gas station or in one of the trucks would hear me and come to help. The 3 men immediately started telling me to shut up and calm down, but I kept screaming and started honking my car horn continuously, over and over, making as much noise as possible. Finally, the gas station attendant came outside to see what was going on, and one of the truck drivers started walking over from the back lot. As soon as the men realized other people were getting involved, they scattered. The one by my door said something threatening under his breath as he walked away, but all 3 of them got into a van parked nearby and drove off quickly. The gas station attendant called the police, and I had to give a statement about what happened. But by the time the officers arrived, the men were long gone, and I hadn't gotten a clear look at their license plate number. The whole incident probably lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The calculated nature of this encounter is what makes it so terrifying. These men had clearly planned this approach, positioning themselves strategically around the poster's car and having a coordinated plan for how to pressure and intimidate her. The fact that they explicitly stated she was going with them either way shows this wasn't just harassment, but an attempted kidnapping. What's most disturbing is how they picked a location where they thought no one would intervene, and how quickly they fled once other people became involved, suggesting they'd done this before and knew exactly how to avoid getting caught. Our next story shows how violations of privacy can happen in places where we should feel most secure, and how predators will exploit even the most private moments. Someone slid their phone under my bathroom stall and started taking photos. This is probably the most violating thing that's ever happened to me, and I still get anxious using public restrooms anywhere. It happened at a shopping mall about 2 months ago, in what I thought was a safe, well-maintained facility. I was shopping with some friends and needed to use the restroom, so I went to the one on the second floor near the food court. It's usually pretty busy, which normally makes me feel safer because there are always people around. The restroom had about 8 stalls, and I chose one in the middle, thinking it would be the most private. I was in there for maybe 2 minutes when I noticed something slide under the stall door. At first, I thought it was just a piece of paper or trash that had blown in from somewhere, so I didn't pay much attention. But then I heard a very faint clicking sound, like someone pressing a button repeatedly. When I looked down, I realized it was a smartphone, lying face up on the floor of my stall. The screen was active, and I could see it was open to the camera app. Someone was taking photos, and from the angle and positioning, they were clearly trying to get pictures of me while I was using the bathroom. I was so shocked that I just froze for a second, not sure if I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. The clicking sound continued, and I could see the flash going off on the phone, which meant whoever was operating it was definitely taking pictures. Multiple pictures. I kicked the phone as hard as I could, sending it sliding back under the stall door toward whoever had put it there. But instead of hearing footsteps running away, which is what I expected, I heard someone quickly grab the phone and then just stay there. No sound of leaving, no movement toward the exit. I yelled, "What the hell is wrong with you?" hoping to shame them into running away, or at least alert other people in the restroom that something was happening. But there was no response, no apology, no acknowledgement at all, just silence, but the kind of silence that feels occupied, like someone is deliberately holding their breath. I quickly finished what I was doing and got dressed, my hands shaking with anger and violation. When I opened the stall door, I expected to see someone rushing toward the exit or at least looking embarrassed about what they'd done. But the restroom appeared to be completely empty. That's what made it even more unsettling. I knew someone had been there just seconds before, someone who had stayed in the restroom after I kicked their phone back to them. But all the stalls appeared to be empty, and I couldn't see anyone by the sinks or anywhere else. Whoever had been taking photos had managed to disappear without making any noise. I checked under all the stall doors to make sure no one was hiding with their feet up, but they were all genuinely empty. I looked behind the trash cans and in the corners where someone might be able to hide, but there was no one there. It was like the person had just vanished into thin air. The more I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. This person had to still be in the restroom somewhere, which meant they were probably hiding in one of the stalls, standing on the toilet so their feet wouldn't show. They were waiting for me to leave so they could continue whatever perverted activity they'd been engaged in. I went to the mall's security office immediately and reported what had happened. They said they would review the security cameras to see who had entered and left the restroom around that time. But the cameras don't actually show inside the bathroom for privacy reasons, so they could only see who went in and out. The security guard walked back to the restroom with me to check if anyone was still in there. By that time, it was completely empty. She said this kind of thing happens more often than people realize, and that they would increase their patrols of that area for the next few weeks. What bothers me most is knowing that somewhere out there, someone has photos of me in an extremely private moment, and there's nothing I can do about it. They could post them online, share them with other perverts, or keep them for their own sick purposes. The violation feels ongoing because those images still exist. I also can't stop thinking about how practiced and deliberate the whole thing seemed. The person knew exactly how to position the phone for the best angle. They knew to keep the sound off so the camera clicks would be barely audible, and they knew how to hide effectively when confronted. This wasn't their first time doing something like this. This violation of privacy in what should be a secure space is absolutely sickening. The fact that the perpetrator had clearly planned this attack, knew how to position the phone for maximum intrusion, and then managed to hide so effectively afterward shows this was practice behavior. What makes it even more disturbing is that they stayed in the restroom after being discovered, suggesting they were either waiting to continue their activities or were getting some kind of thrill from the poster's distress. The ongoing violation of knowing those photos exist somewhere is a trauma that continues long after the incident ended. Sometimes the most unsettling encounters involve sounds that create a psychological game, making you question whether you're being followed or if it's all in your imagination. I was walking home and realized the footsteps behind me matched mine perfectly. This happened just a few weeks ago, and I'm still not sure if what I experienced was real or if my imagination got the better of me. But the feeling of being hunted, of having someone deliberately mirror my movements, was absolutely terrifying. It was around 10 at night, and I was walking home from a friend's apartment. The route takes me through a residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets and decent lighting, so I usually feel pretty safe making the walk alone. It's about a 15-minute walk from her place to mine, mostly along sidewalks with houses on both sides. About 5 minutes into the walk, I started noticing footsteps behind me. Not unusual in itself, since other people live in the neighborhood and walk around at night too. But these footsteps had a very distinctive sound, like someone wearing hard-soled shoes or boots that made a sharp clicking noise against the pavement. At first, the rhythm didn't match mine exactly. The person behind me seemed to be walking at their own pace, sometimes faster, sometimes slower than me. But gradually, over the course of a few blocks, I started noticing that our footsteps were becoming synchronized. When I took a step, they took a step. When I paused, they paused. I decided to test whether this was really happening or if I was just being paranoid. I deliberately changed my walking speed, slowing down significantly to see what the person behind me would do. Sure enough, their footsteps slowed down too, maintaining the exact same rhythm and timing as mine. Then I sped up, walking much faster than normal, almost at a jogging pace. The footsteps behind me immediately matched my new speed, staying perfectly synchronized with my movements. There was no delay, no period of adjustment. It was like whoever was behind me was watching my feet and deliberately matching their pace to mine. I tried stopping completely, pretending to check my phone, to see if the person would walk past me and reveal themselves. But when I stopped walking, the footsteps stopped too. I stood there for about 30 seconds, and there was complete silence behind me. No movement, no sound of someone walking away or continuing past me. When I started walking again, the footsteps resumed immediately, falling back into that perfect synchronization with my own steps. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, matching me exactly like an echo or a shadow made of sound. It was the most unnerving thing I'd ever experienced. I turned around to look, but the street behind me appeared to be empty. The streetlights created these pools of yellow light with dark spaces in between, and I couldn't see anyone in the illuminated areas. But the footsteps were definitely there, definitely real, definitely matching mine with mathematical precision. That's when I heard something that made my blood run cold. When I stopped walking and turned around to look, I heard a very quiet laugh from somewhere behind me. Not loud, not meant to be threatening or intimidating. Just a soft chuckle, like someone was amused by the game we were playing. The laugh seemed to come from very close by, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind me, but I still couldn't see anyone. The shadows between the streetlights were deep enough that someone could have been hiding there, but they would have had to be deliberately concealing themselves to remain invisible. I started walking again, faster this time, and the footsteps resumed their perfect synchronization. But now I knew for certain that someone was there, someone who was deliberately playing this psychological game with me, someone who found my fear amusing and wanted me to know they were watching and following. I considered running, but I was worried that would escalate whatever was happening into something more dangerous. Instead, I took out my phone and called a friend, speaking loudly enough that whoever was behind me would hear that other people knew where I was and that I was expected to arrive home safely. The footsteps continued matching mine for another few blocks, but once I got to the busiest street near my apartment building, they stopped. I turned around one last time before going inside, and the sidewalk behind me was completely empty. But I had the strong feeling that whoever had been following me was still there, just hidden, watching me reach safety. I filed a report with the police the next day, but there wasn't much they could do about someone walking behind me on a public sidewalk, even if they were doing it in a creepy way. The officer suggested I vary my route home and maybe walk with friends when possible, but he couldn't investigate further without more concrete evidence of harassment or threats. This psychological game of matching footsteps creates such an eerie sense of being hunted. The precision with which the stalker mirrored every change in pace shows they were completely focused on the poster's movements, turning a simple walk home into a terrifying cat and mouse game. What makes it even more unsettling is that whoever was following the poster was skilled enough to remain completely invisible while staying close enough to match every footstep perfectly. The quiet laugh when they stopped walking shows this person was enjoying the psychological torment they were inflicting. It's the kind of calculated mind game that suggests someone who has done this before and knows exactly how to terrorize their victims without technically crossing any legal lines. Our final That Story shows us sometimes the most terrifying encounters are the ones that seem impossible to explain, leaving us questioning our own perception of reality. I was walking home and realized the footsteps behind me matched mine perfectly. This happened just a few weeks ago, and I'm still not sure if what I experienced was real or if my imagination got the better of me. But the feeling of being hunted, of having someone deliberately mirror my movements, was absolutely terrifying. It was around 10 at night, and I was walking home from a friend's apartment. The route takes me through a residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets and decent lighting, so I usually feel pretty safe making the walk alone. It's about a 15-minute walk from her place to mine, mostly along sidewalks with houses on both sides. About 5 minutes into the walk, I started noticing footsteps behind me. Not unusual in itself, since other people live in the neighborhood and walk around at night too. But these footsteps had a very distinctive sound, like someone wearing hard-soled shoes or boots that made a sharp clicking noise against the pavement. At first, the rhythm didn't match mine exactly. The person behind me seemed to be walking at their own pace, sometimes faster, sometimes slower than me. But gradually, over the course of a few blocks, I started noticing that our footsteps were becoming synchronized. When I took a step, they took a step. When I paused, they paused. I decided to test whether this was really happening or if I was just being paranoid. I deliberately changed my walking speed, slowing down significantly to see what the person behind me would do. Sure enough, their footsteps slowed down too, maintaining the exact same rhythm and timing as mine. Then I sped up, walking much faster than normal, almost at a jogging pace. The footsteps behind me immediately matched my new speed, staying perfectly synchronized with my movements. There was no delay, no period of adjustment. It was like whoever was behind me was watching my feet and deliberately matching their pace to mine. I tried stopping completely, pretending to check my phone, to see if the person would walk past me and reveal themselves. But when I stopped walking, the footsteps stopped too. I stood there for about 30 seconds, and there was complete silence behind me. No movement, no sound of someone walking away or continuing past me. When I started walking again, the footsteps resumed immediately, falling back into that perfect synchronization with my own steps. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, matching me exactly like an echo or a shadow made of sound. It was the most unnerving thing I'd ever experienced. I turned around to look, but the street behind me appeared to be empty. The streetlights created these pools of yellow light with dark spaces in between, and I couldn't see anyone in the illuminated areas. But the footsteps were definitely there, definitely real, definitely matching mine with mathematical precision. That's when I heard something that made my blood run cold. When I stopped walking and turned around to look, I heard a very quiet laugh from somewhere behind me. Not loud, not meant to be threatening or intimidating. Just a soft chuckle, like someone was amused by the game we were playing. The laugh seemed to come from very close by, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind me, but I still couldn't see anyone. The shadows between the streetlights were deep enough that someone could have been hiding there, but they would have had to be deliberately concealing themselves to remain invisible. I started walking again, faster this time, and the footsteps resumed their perfect synchronization. But now I knew for certain that someone was there, someone who was deliberately playing this psychological game with me, someone who found my fear amusing and wanted me to know they were watching and following. I considered running, but I was worried that would escalate whatever was happening into something more dangerous. Instead, I took out my phone and called a friend, speaking loudly enough that whoever was behind me would hear that other people knew where I was and that I was expected to arrive home safely. The footsteps continued matching mine for another few blocks, but once I got to the busiest street near my apartment building, they stopped. I turned around one last time before going inside, and the sidewalk behind me was completely empty. But I had the strong feeling that whoever had been following me was still there, just hidden, watching me reach safety. I filed a report with the police the next day, but there wasn't much they could do about someone walking behind me on a public sidewalk, even if they were doing it in a creepy way. The officer suggested I vary my route home and maybe walk with friends when possible, but he couldn't investigate further without more concrete evidence of harassment or threats. What makes this final story so deeply unsettling is the precision and patience required to match someone's footsteps so perfectly. This person turned a simple walk home into an elaborate psychological torture session, staying invisible while making their presence undeniably known. The quiet laugh reveals someone who genuinely enjoyed the fear they were creating, turning stalking into a twisted form of entertainment. It's the kind of methodical mental manipulation that suggests this wasn't their first time playing such games. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe for more. For now, sleep well, and remember to trust those instincts that have kept our species alive for thousands of years. Sometimes the most important skill we can develop is simply recognizing when something isn't right.